They had been called away to save lives, and in their absence, Emma and Sarah discovered something they hadn't known they were searching for: each other. It started on an ordinary Thursday evening in Manhattan, the kind of night that begins with reservation confirmations and ends with everything you thought you knew about yourself quietly crumbling. Emma had spent 40 minutes deciding what to wear, finally settling on a navy dress that her husband David barely noticed when she emerged from the bedroom. He was already checking his phone, his mind half at the hospital even though they were supposed to be off duty, supposed to be normal people having dinner with colleagues, supposed to pretend for a few hours that their marriage was more than two exhausted doctors passing each other in hallways. The restaurant was one of those places where the lighting was deliberately dim and the menu prices were deliberately absent, where successful people came to perform the theater of having lives outside their professions. Emma smoothed her dress as they walked in, catching her reflection in the polished brass of the entrance, a woman in her late 30s who looked successful and put together and deeply, desperately lonely in ways she had trained herself not to acknowledge. Sarah and her husband Marcus were already at the table. Sarah in a burgundy blouse that brought out the warmth in her brown skin, her natural hair styled in elegant twists that must have taken an hour. Emma had met Sarah only twice before at hospital functions, brief conversations about research protocols and staffing shortages, the kind of professional small talk that fills the spaces between people who work in adjacent worlds but never actually touch. They greeted each other with the practiced warmth of near strangers, the men shaking hands firmly, the women exchanging a polite kiss on the cheek. Sarah's perfume something citrusy and unexpected, lingering for a moment after they separated. They ordered wine, made jokes about hospital cafeteria food, discussed a recent surgery that had gone viral on medical Twitter, inhabited the safe territory of shared profession and mutual acquaintance. Emma watched Sarah laugh at something Marcus said, noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the elegant movement of her hands when she talked, and felt nothing but ordinary friendliness, no premonition of what was about to unfold, no sense that this night would split her life into before and after. They had barely finished their appetizers when David's pager went off, the sharp beep cutting through the ambient jazz and murmured conversations. He checked it, his expression shifting instantly from relaxed to focused. The transformation Emma had witnessed thousands of times, the husband disappearing and the surgeon appearing in his place. Mass casualty event, he said quietly. Multi-vehicle accident on the bridge. All hands on deck. He was standing before he finished the sentence, already pulling out his phone to call the hospital. Marcus's pager went off 30 seconds later. The same message, the same transformation. The two men were a practice team of apology and efficiency, Marcus signaling for the check, David squeezing Emma's shoulder absently, both of them promising to make it up to their wives, both of them already gone even though their bodies were still standing at the table. "We should do this again soon," Marcus said to Sarah, kissing her forehead. And then they were walking away. Two men in expensive suits heading toward blood and trauma, and the work that always came first, leaving their wives sitting across from each other in the flickering candlelight, the table suddenly too large, the silence suddenly too loud. Emma reached for her wine glass, unsure of the protocol, whether she should suggest they leave separately, whether this evening was over or somehow just beginning. Sarah met her eyes across the table and smiled, a real smile, not the professional one from earlier, and said in a voice that carried both resignation and humor, "Well, this is familiar." Emma laughed despite herself, the tension breaking, and Sarah continued, "I've been the wife left at the table so many times I should get a loyalty card." Something about her directness, her willingness to name the thing they were both feeling, made Emma relax. She heard herself saying, "I ordered the duck and I've been thinking about it for 3 days. I'm not leaving until I eat it." Sarah's smile widened. "Same, except I got the lamb. So we're staying?" "We're staying," Emma confirmed, and just like that, the decision was made. Two women choosing to continue a night that had lost its original purpose, finding a new one in the simple act of not being alone. They ate their entrees slowly, the conversation shifting from polite to genuine, from the surface to something deeper. Sarah talked about her residency in Chicago, the 70-hour weeks. the attending physician who told her she'd never make it because she asked too many questions. Emma shared her own stories, the fear of her first solo surgery, the patient who held her hand and told her she looked too young to be cutting people open. They laughed about the ridiculous things, the hospital politics, the egos, the time Marcus accidentally wore mismatched shoes to a board meeting, the time David fell asleep during sex and tried to pretend he hadn't. But underneath the laughter was something else, a current of recognition. Two women who had built their lives around demanding careers and partnership with men who were married first to medicine, who understood what it meant to celebrate anniversaries alone, to have conversations interrupted by emergencies, to be perpetually second to the pager. When the waiter asked about dessert, Sarah suggested they skip it and go somewhere else, somewhere less formal, somewhere they could actually talk without feeling like they were on display. Emma surprised herself by immediately agreeing. They ended up at a small bar in the West Village, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and exposed brick and a bartender who looked like he wrote poetry in his spare time. Sarah ordered an old-fashioned, and Emma got a glass of red wine, and they claimed a corner table that felt like a confession booth, intimate and separate from the rest of the world. The conversation that had been merely honest at dinner became something more, became the kind of raw vulnerability that usually takes months or years to reach. Sarah talked about her marriage to Marcus, and Emma waited for the complaints, the familiar litany of a relationship slowly dying from neglect. But instead, Sarah said something that made Emma's breath catch. "We have an open marriage," Sarah said simply, watching Emma's face for reaction. "It works for us. We love each other. We respect each other. But we also acknowledge that we're complex people with needs that can't all be met by one person. It's not for everyone, but it's honest." Emma felt her pulse quicken, not from judgment, but from something else. A sudden awareness that there were ways of living she had never considered, structures she had never questioned. She found herself asking questions, real questions, not polite ones, and Sarah answered without defensiveness, explaining the rules they'd established, the communication required, the freedom it gave them both. "And what about you?" Sarah asked gently. "What's your marriage like?" Emma took a long drink of wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, loosening something that had been held tight for years. "It's closed," she said finally. "Monogamous, traditional. And it's dying." The words came out before she could stop them, the truth she had been avoiding for months, maybe years. "We barely talk anymore except about logistics. Who's picking up dry cleaning? Whose turn it is to call his mother? Whether we need milk. We haven't had sex in 4 months. We sleep in the same bed and we're completely alone." She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back, embarrassed. But Sarah reached across the table and took her hand, a simple gesture of comfort that felt like everything. "I see you," Sarah said quietly. And Emma realized it was true. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years, felt known by this woman she barely knew but who somehow understood her completely. They ordered another round of drinks, and the conversation flowed like water, easy and natural, touching on everything and nothing. Childhood dreams and current disappointments, favorite books and secret fears, the way they both cried during certain songs, the way they both felt guilty for wanting more than they had. Emma told stories she had never told anyone, about the miscarriage she'd had 2 years ago that David never wanted to discuss, about the novel she'd started writing in medical school and abandoned, about the feeling she sometimes had of living someone else's life, of having made all the right choices and ended up in the wrong place. Sarah listened with complete attention, not trying to fix or advise, just witnessing. And in that witnessing, Emma felt something unlock inside her, felt permission to be complex and contradictory and uncertain. When Sarah talked about her own struggles, her fear of never being enough, her tendency to overwork to prove her worth, her complicated relationship with her parents who still didn't fully understand her career choices, Emma found herself leaning forward, hanging on every word, fascinated by the architecture of this woman's inner life. Somewhere around midnight, after the 3rd round of drinks, Sarah said something about finding the bathroom, and Emma watched her walk away, noticed the grace in her movement, the confidence in her posture, and felt a flutter in her stomach that she tried to dismiss as alcohol or exhaustion or anything other than what it actually was. When Sarah came back, sliding into her seat with a smile that seemed to light up the dim bar, Emma couldn't look away, couldn't pretend she wasn't feeling something she had never felt before, or maybe had felt but never acknowledged, never allowed herself to name. The air between them had changed, had become charged with possibility, and when Sarah's knee brushed against hers under the table, neither of them moved away. They were talking about music, about a concert Sarah had been to last month, but Emma wasn't really hearing the words anymore, was only aware of the space between them shrinking, of the way Sarah's eyes kept dropping to her lips, of her own heart beating so loud she was sure everyone in the bar could hear it. "I should tell you something," Sarah said softly, and Emma nodded, unable to speak. "I find you incredibly attractive." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating and impossible to unhear. Emma's first instinct was to deflect, to laugh it off, to pretend she had misunderstood. But Sarah's eyes were too honest, too hopeful, and Emma found herself saying, "I find you attractive too," the admission feeling both terrifying and inevitable. They sat in that acknowledgement for a long moment, the world narrowing to just the two of them, just this table, this night, this choice. Sarah reached out slowly, giving Emma every opportunity to pull back, and tucked a strand of hair behind Emma's ear, her fingers grazing Emma's cheek, and the touch was electric, sent shivers down Emma's spine in a way nothing had in years. "Can I kiss you?" Sarah whispered. And Emma, her mind screaming all the reasons this was wrong, all the ways this would complicate everything, found herself nodding, found herself leaning in, found herself meeting Sarah halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked with lips instead of words. And then it deepened, became an answer, became a conversation they were having with their entire bodies. Sarah's hand cupping Emma's face, Emma's fingers threading through Sarah's hair, both of them breathing hard when they finally pulled apart. Emma's eyes were wide, her lips tingling, her entire world reorganizing itself around this moment. "Oh my God," she whispered, and Sarah smiled, her thumb tracing Emma's jawline. "Yeah," she said simply. They kissed again, longer this time, and Emma felt something she had forgotten was possible, felt desire and connection and rightness all tangled together, felt like she was finally herself. But then, the bartender announced last call, and the spell broke slightly, reality creeping back in, and Emma remembered that she was married, that this was another woman, that everything she thought she knew about herself was being challenged by this beautiful, brilliant person who was looking at her like she hung the moon. They left the bar and stood on the sidewalk in the cool night air, neither wanting to say goodbye, neither knowing what came next. Sarah called them a cab, and they rode in silence. Emma's hand in Sarah's, both of them processing what had just happened. When they reached Emma's building, she turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes and said, "I can't do this. I'm married. I'm not. I don't." And her words tumbled over each other, panic rising in her chest. Sarah squeezed her hand and said gently, "I know. I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for, but I need you to know that what I feel is real. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here." She kissed Emma softly one more time, a kiss that tasted like goodbye, and maybe, and then she was gone, the cab pulling away, leaving Emma standing alone on the sidewalk with the weight of everything she had just discovered pressing down on her chest. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay next to David, who had come home at 3 a.m, and fallen immediately into the deep sleep of the exhausted, and she replayed every moment of the evening, every word Sarah had said, every touch, every look. She felt guilt, like a living thing inside her. Felt like she had betrayed David even though part of her whispered that you couldn't betray someone who was never really there. She thought about the kiss, about how alive it had made her feel, how seen and desired and truly herself. And she thought about her marriage, about the slow death of connection, about whether it was possible to love someone and still be profoundly lonely. When morning came, she got up and made coffee and went through the motions of her day. But everything felt different. Felt like she was watching herself from outside her body. Like she was playing the role of Emma the wife, Emma the doctor, while the real Emma, the one who had kissed Sarah and felt the earth shift, was hidden somewhere deep inside, waiting. Days passed, and Emma didn't reach out to Sarah. Couldn't reach out. Told herself she was doing the right thing by preserving her marriage, by ignoring what had happened. But Sarah was everywhere in her thoughts, in her dreams, in the space between her and David that seemed to grow wider every day. She found herself going through the motions of her life mechanically, smiling at the right times, saying the right things, but feeling increasingly like a stranger to herself. David noticed nothing, or if he did, he said nothing, and his obliviousness felt like both a relief and a condemnation. 2 weeks after that night, Emma got a text from Sarah, just a simple message asking how she was, and Emma stared at it for an hour before responding with something neutral and safe, and they fell into a pattern of occasional texts, friendly but careful, both dancing around what neither could forget. A month later, they ran into each other at a medical conference, both presenting research, and the moment their eyes met across the crowded hall, Emma felt her heart lurch. They had coffee afterward, ostensibly to catch up as colleagues, but the undercurrent was there, the awareness, the wanting. Sarah looked tired, Emma noticed, shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and when Emma asked if she was okay, Sarah admitted that things with Marcus had gotten complicated, that the open marriage was revealing cracks they'd been able to ignore before, that she had realized some needs couldn't be met by anyone except a specific person. Emma knew Sarah was talking about her, felt the weight of that confession, felt the impossibility of it all. They parted with another careful hug, another promise to stay in touch, another night of Emma lying awake wondering what she was so afraid of, why she was choosing slow death over the possibility of real life. It took 3 more months for Emma to break. 3 months of increasingly hollow conversations with David, of sex that felt like obligation, of looking at her reflection and not recognizing the woman staring back. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way except that David forgot their anniversary, and Emma realized she didn't even care, realized she had been mourning this marriage for years, realized she was staying out of fear and habit, and some outdated idea of who she was supposed to be. She asked David to sit down that night, and she told him the truth, not about Sarah specifically, but about the distance between them, about how she felt invisible in her own marriage, about how they had become roommates who occasionally had perfunctory sex. David looked genuinely shocked, like he had no idea things were this bad, and maybe he didn't. Maybe he had been as checked out as she had. They talked for hours, really talked for the first time in years, and by the end of it, they both knew the truth. The marriage was over. It had been over for a long time. They were just finally brave enough to admit it. The divorce was surprisingly amicable. 2 people who still cared about each other but had stopped being in love, who could acknowledge they wanted different things, who could part with sadness but not bitterness. Emma moved out into a small apartment in Brooklyn, started therapy, began the painful work of figuring out who she was outside of being David's wife, outside of the identity she had built and defended for so long. She didn't contact Sarah immediately, knew she needed to do this work alone, needed to be whole before she could offer herself to anyone else. But 6 months into her new life, 6 months of therapy and journaling and long walks and slowly coming back to herself, Emma found Sarah's number in her phone, and before she could overthink it, she pressed call. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious and hopeful, and Emma said, "I ended my marriage. I'm living alone in Brooklyn and going to therapy and figuring out who I am. and I don't have everything together. I'm still a mess in a lot of ways. But I know one thing for certain. That night we spent together wasn't a mistake. It was the most honest I've been in years. And I can't stop thinking about you." There was silence on the other end, long enough that Emma thought maybe Sarah had moved on. Maybe too much time had passed. But then Sarah's voice came through, thick with emotion. "I'm separated from Marcus," she said. "We tried to make it work, but we were holding on to something that was already gone. I've been hoping you'd call. Can I see you?" Emma felt tears streaming down her face, felt something like joy breaking through the fear. "Yes," she said. "Please." They met at a coffee shop in Manhattan, neutral territory, both of them nervous in a way that felt young and precious. Sarah looked different, Emma thought. Lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. They ordered coffee they barely touched and talked for 3 hours. Not about what might be, but about what was. About the work they'd both been doing. The truths they'd both been facing. The fear of trying again. Of being hurt. Of failing. Emma told Sarah about therapy. About learning that she'd spent her whole life performing for others. About how terrifying and exhilarating it was to start making choices based on what she actually wanted. Sarah talked about her separation. About the grief of letting go of a relationship that had been good but not right. About realizing she wanted partnership that was equal and present and emotionally available. They didn't touch, didn't kiss, just talked and looked at each other with careful hope. Two people who had been through fire and come out changed, considering whether they could build something real from the ashes. They took it slow, painfully slow, a pace that honored what they'd both been through and what they were both still processing. Coffee dates turned into dinners, dinners into walks through the city, walks into museum visits and bookstore browsing, and the gradual building of a friendship that felt solid, that could hold the weight of everything they were bringing to it. It was 2 months before they kissed again, standing on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, and this time there was no guilt, no panic. Just the sweet rightness of two people choosing each other with open eyes and open hearts. The kiss was tender and careful and full of promise, and when they pulled apart, Sarah asked, "Are we doing this? Are we really doing this?" And Emma, no longer afraid, no longer hiding, said yes. Yes, we are. The relationship that grew between them was nothing like what Emma had known before. It was built on communication, on vulnerability, on the willingness to be messy and imperfect, and still show up. They had hard conversations about what they needed, about boundaries and triggers and the baggage they both carried. They went to couples therapy even though they'd only been together for 6 months, both committed to doing it right this time, to not repeating old patterns. Sarah met Emma's family, and Emma met Sarah's, both sets of parents struggling to understand but trying, asking awkward questions and using wrong language but showing up, making effort. Emma's mother cried and then hugged Sarah and said, "I just want my daughter to be happy." And Emma realized that was enough, that acceptance came in imperfect forms, and that was okay. They moved in together after a year, combining households and lives and futures, learning each other's rhythms, negotiating closet space and morning routines and who did the dishes. They fought sometimes. Real fights about real things. About Emma's tendency to shut down when overwhelmed. About Sarah's need for constant reassurance. About money and family and where to spend holidays. But they fought fair. Fought with the understanding that conflict was part of intimacy. That you could be angry and still love someone. That you didn't have to perform perfection to deserve partnership. Emma watched Sarah get ready for work in the mornings and felt grateful. Felt chosen, felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 years after that first kiss, Sarah proposed. Not in a restaurant or at a landmark, but on a regular Thursday evening in their apartment, both of them in sweatpants and old t-shirts, Sarah suddenly getting down on one knee in the middle of making dinner and saying, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to fight with you, and make up with you, and build a home with you, and grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Emma pulled her up, crying and laughing at the same time, and said yes before Sarah even finished the question. They got married in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by friends and family, both wearing dresses they'd chosen together, both crying through their vows, both meaning every word. Emma promised to be brave, to stay present, to choose Sarah every day. Sarah promised to be patient, to communicate, to love Emma not despite her complexity but because of it. When they kissed as wives for the first time, Emma felt complete in a way she never had before. Felt like all the pain and fear and uncertainty had led to this moment, to this woman, to this life they were building together. Years later, Emma would think back to that night in the restaurant, to the moment when David and Marcus left and she and Sarah chose to stay, and she would marvel at how much had changed, how much courage it had taken to dismantle the life she thought she wanted and build the one she needed. She would think about the woman she had been, so afraid of her own truth, so committed to performing normalcy, and feel compassion for her, feel grateful that she had finally been brave enough to listen to the part of herself that whispered, "There's more than this. You deserve more than this." She would look at Sarah across the breakfast table or on the couch or in their bed and feel waves of love so profound they took her breath away, feel thankful for a partner who saw her completely and loved her anyway, who challenged her and supported her and chose her day after day after day. Their husbands had been called away to save lives, and in their absence, Emma and Sarah had saved each other, had found in an unexpected moment the love that would transform everything, the love that proved it was never too late to choose yourself, to choose honesty, to choose the life you actually wanted instead of the one you thought you were supposed to have. And that choice, that courageous, terrifying, beautiful choice, made all the difference.